Ducati World, sometimes known as Ducati World Racing, is one of those games from the PlayStation 1 which deserves more recognition than it actually gets. It's a game which definitely has fans, myself included. I love Ducati World, and it's a game, as I said, which doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. It's, I would say, one of the best examples of a motorbike racing game. Now, the motorbike racing scene, as far as consoles go, isn't as broad as cars. With cars, you've got Gran Turismo, Need for Speed, Forza, Project Cars, Test Drive Unlimited, and tons of others, dozens of others. With motorbike games, not so much. There are a few here and there, but most motorbike games tend to be either super realistic in their goals, such as the MotoGP games, kind of like the Formula 1 of bike games, and then some other bike games tend to swing entirely the other way, going much more for the camp and the cheese factor, just about fun rather than realism. There are relatively few which manage to balance the gap between both, and those that do tend to be remembered, like Tourist Trophy and Ride. The funny thing is, though, this game doesn't get that recognition. It does have fans, as I said, but you don't hear people talking about Ducati World. Now, it is on the PS1, and that's a fair argument. Of course, less people play that now, but there are other PS1 games and older games in general which still get great recognition. At the end of the day, Tourist Trophy is an older game, but it still has a lot of love. So why is that the case for Ducati World, and is it actually worth checking out? And also, why do I consider it to be this kind of undervalued gem? Well, one of the reasons why I consider this to be a great bike game and also a great racing game in general, you don't even have to be a huge Ducati fan or even a huge bike fan in general, is that it presents an entire package of physics, graphics, music, menus, bike selection, etc. in a way which is very reminiscent of much more successful games, and I would say such as Gran Turismo. This game is kind of Gran Turismo for bikes on the PS1. Now, there may be other games which are similar, but this is the one which really stuck out for me. Now, it does specialise in Ducati, as the name suggests, and there is a much newer Ducati game as well, which I believe was released this year, if I remember correctly. But this one is the OG. It's a game which came out way before people were doing specialised games of this size for a single manufacturer, and it did it really well. You have an amazing selection of Ducatis to work with, obviously only to a certain point due to the age of the game, but you've got Tourers, sports bikes, super bikes, naked city bikes, full-on race bikes, and even vintage bikes as well. And most of those bikes can be upgraded as well, and that's also something which you don't really see on motorbike games. You don't see modification done, which is why games, again, like Ride, stand out so much, because you can modify the bikes on there. Now, on this game, you would probably assume that the modification isn't going to be as in-depth, because after all, it's on a PS1, it's a smaller game by today's standards in terms of memory space, so how big and how in-depth could it really be? Well, there are a lot more bikes on here than you'd assume there would be. You may assume perhaps 20, 25 bikes at best, but there's actually a fair few more than that. There's not a ridiculous amount, there's not every Ducati ever made, for instance, but there's a very strong selection up to and including the likes of the 748, which is still my personal favourite Ducati ever, and the 996. You can win Kyle Fogarty's bike himself after racing him, and the career mode, although not as immersive as something like Gran Turismo, is very reminiscent of it, and some of the things that this game does are very similar to the way that Gran Turismo does, such as passing license tests, but the difference with this game is you actually get paid for completing those license tests, whereas of course on Gran Turismo you don't. You've got career mode, arcade mode, two-player split screen, very reminiscent things of games which are far better known and remembered with more love than Ducati World seems to be. It's not that people don't like the game, it just seems that a lot of people haven't tried it. Now, that's understandable, because many games which specialise in just one particular field in an overly niched kind of way, or especially catering to just one manufacturer, although it sounds like a cool concept, it's not necessarily the best business strategy, because although it appeals to fans of that brand, the appeal beyond that is relatively limited, because people will assume, well, what if I don't like Ducati? What's the point in getting the game then? Well, actually, you can be a fan of any bike really and still enjoy the game. The physics are, I would say, a great mix of realistic but also fun. Usually, at least in my experience, motorbike games and also car racing games tend to swing either for one extreme or the other. Realism or fun. There are relatively few that genuinely have both, and I would say that Gran Turismo has pretty much always done a good job of having both. This is very much the Gran Turismo of bike games on the PS1, as far as I'm concerned. The handling physics are fantastic to work with. You won't necessarily get everything straight away. There are obviously things to learn, methods to master, but once you do, you can absolutely fly around the track regardless of the bike that you're riding, be it old ones, new ones, lightweight, high-powered ones, or larger, heavy Tourers. I love the bike selection that they have on the game. It's one of the best features, I would say, and you can even use cheat discs to change the experience of the game, unlock extra vehicles if you want to. So overall, although it doesn't have the recognition that it deserves or the scope of something like Gran Turismo, as far as bike games go, it actually still holds up remarkably well even now, and if you do own a PS3, say the newer shape, the slimmer one, you can load up and save this game on that console without needing to go out and get a PS1 or a memory card or a controller or any of that nonsense. So if you haven't checked out Ducati World and you are obviously a fan of bike racing, maybe a Ducati fan, maybe not, I'm not the biggest fan of Ducati, but I still love the game, then I'd recommend trying to pick it up. It's not overly expensive, and who knows, you might just like it. So if you'd like to see other game reviews for various styles of game, then of course you can click through to that at the end of this video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.